Okay. Welcome everyone to the Amsterdam Center for European Studies, where today we hold an online symposium on fighting global deforestation, the EU's proposed regulation. I am Maria Weimer, an associate professor of EU law at the Amsterdam Center for European Law and Governance at the University of Amsterdam. I am joined today by a distinguished group of speakers to discuss a recent legislative proposal of the European Commission on how to regulate agricultural commodities that are being placed on the European market and that are associated with deforestation. Before I present our speakers today, let me briefly introduce the topic of our discussion. Deforestation is a major global challenge today. It contributes to the climate emergency and to global biodiversity loss. It also contributes in many countries to rampant illegality and the violation of community rights. A major driver of deforestation is international trade in agricultural commodities. The recent Commission proposal published in November last year covers 6 such commodities, namely cattle, cocoa, coffee, oil palm, soya, and wood. This proposal is considered to be a path-breaking development because it is the first regulation worldwide to ban products from the market where their production has contributed to deforestation and forest degradation. It is the first measure of this kind to attempt to regulate agricultural supply chains to achieve sustainability on such a broad scale. According to the European Commission, the main objective behind this measure is to curb deforestation and forest degradation that is provoked by EU consumption and production. And this in turn is expected to reduce greenhouse gas emissions as well as to fight global biodiversity loss. Now, this panel is the second panel that we organize at the Amsterdam Center for European Studies discussing this topic. The first panel was organized by my colleague Jonathan Zeitlin, whom you can see here on the screen with us, and it took place at the beginning of February. In this first panel, we already discussed some of the demand side features of this proposal. And it was generally agreed among those participating in the discussion that the proposal as it currently stands brings about or would bring about major innovations, such as, for example, the shift from legality to sustainability, as well as a new system of mandatory due diligence for all traders and operators. And later on in the discussion, we will cover this in more detail. If you're interested, you can find the video recordings of this first panel on our website, on the website of the Amsterdam Center for European Studies. Today, in contrast, we want to focus on so-called supply-side measures. And that is, measures that support cooperation with producer countries and tackle governance challenges in these countries. Now, it is widely acknowledged that cooperation with producer countries is key to make this regulation work well. It is also very important to address the risk of leakage, that is, the risk that while cleaning up EU supply chains, deforestation might shift to other import markets or to other commodities that are not currently regulated. Lastly, cooperation is also important for the legitimacy of this regulation, not only under international law, but also in terms of the acceptance of this measure in producer countries. After all, the kind of transition that is envisaged brings with it adjustment challenges, and it might create the unintended effect of excluding certain actors and communities, for example, smallholders. The proposed regulation acknowledges these challenges and the importance of cooperation, and it does so currently in two ways. The first one is the so-called country benchmarking system. Here, the European Commission will assess the deforestation risks of countries based on three categories: low risk, standard risk, and high risk. And this in turn will have implications for the level of obligations under this regulation. So for example, products coming from low risk countries, here companies will have to perform only a simplified due diligence and not the full due diligence. The purpose of this benchmarking system is to incentivize producer countries to improve forest protection and to avoid the risk of leakage. Now, the second mechanism envisaged is the development of so-called partnership and cooperation mechanisms with producer countries. The form and nature of these mechanisms is defined very broadly at the moment. They can include dialogues or support programs, but they can also include agreements with producer countries, which would enable the country to make the kind of transition necessary to comply with this regulation. And it is important to note that these agreements and their effective implementation is linked to the benchmarking that I mentioned before, in the way that the Commission will consider them as part of their country assessment. It is, however, not very clear at the moment how exactly this will happen and with what consequences for market access. In today's panel, we want to discuss these supply side mechanisms, their ambitions and challenges, and also, above all, whether they provide sufficient incentives for producer countries to engage in cooperation and to work towards change in their countries. In other words, will they be able to catalyze reform, governance reform in producer countries? Now, let me introduce our panelists. As our keynote speaker, I have the pleasure to introduce Bojan Grlaš. Bojan is team leader on international forestry issues in the Directorate General for Environment at the European Commission. We are very happy to have him today because he has been leading the team that has drafted the Commission proposal. Bojan's areas of work cover policy development and implementation, regulatory and policy dialogues with partner countries, multilateral organizations, as well as negotiation and implementation of trade agreements. Before joining the Commission, Bojan has worked at the United Nations and at the World Bank. I also welcome Julia Christian. Julia is cocoa and forest campaigner at FERN, an independent advocacy organization campaigning to protect forests and the rights of people who depend on them. She is a lawyer trained in the UK and the US and has worked on forest policy with local NGOs in West and Central Africa, Central America, and Europe. Her current focus is on the EU West Africa cocoa trade. I'm also very happy to have with us today two speakers who can speak about the producer country perspective, which is so important for this discussion. We have with us Mardi Minangsari, also known as Minang, who joins us today from Indonesia. She is the president of KWM Telepak, an environmental NGO based in Bogor. She also works with the UK office of the Environmental Investigation Agency. Minang has over 20 years of experience on illegal logging and forest governance issues. She coordinated the Indonesian civil society groups working on FLEGT issues and has been actively involved in developing and improving the Indonesian timber legality assurance system, as well as campaigning around palm oil and deforestation. Last but not least, I'm also happy to welcome Obed Osuwu-Adai, who joins us from Ghana. Obed is co-founder and managing campaigner at EcoCare Ghana, a rights-based campaign and advocacy organization that works to transform decision-making processes on natural resources and the environment. He is a member of Forest Watch Ghana, and in the past, he worked in several organizations working on forestry, such as Civic Response, Tropenbos International Ghana, and the Ghana Forestry Commission. There is also another speaker who was supposed to be with us today, but has not yet joined, and I'm hoping that she will join us any moment now, and that is Lisa Kierfel-Rühle. Lisa is Deputy Head of Division.
I'm in, sorry, I'm just, I have technical problems. Maybe I can see you even, and yeah. I'm here by phone. So you cannot, maybe I see you, but you know, as I had to jump in spontaneously, I can at least talk. And maybe we managed to
so, yes, I couldn't see your name on the screen, but all right, it's good to hear that you're with us, Lisa. I will continue introducing you then. Lisa is Deputy Head of Division for Sustainable Agricultural Value Chains and International Agriculture Policy at the German Ministry for Economic Cooperation and Development. Lisa today has agreed to replace her colleague Sebastian Lesch, who was originally on the program, but unfortunately cannot join us today. So thank you very much for joining us on such a short notice, and welcome. Now, everybody, thanks so much for agreeing to participate. I'm looking forward to our discussion. Here's the format for our discussion. Bojan will open by setting the stage and explaining the Commission proposal. I will then invite Julia and Lisa, or first Lisa, then Julia, to share their views and comments on the proposal. After that, I will ask all panelists to react to the three first presentations. And after that, I will open the floor to the audience. Dear audience, if you have questions, please write them down in the Q&A section that you can see at the bottom of your screen. And I will call on you and ask you to unmute and to ask your question yourself. So this will be the first hour, after which Lisa will unfortunately have to leave us. And in the second hour, we repeat the format with Minang and Obed and their presentations, and again followed by a round of discussion. So thank you very much for being here. And without further ado, Bojan, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, and good morning, everyone, or good afternoon for some of you possibly. I wish to first of all thanks very much to the organizers for organizing this event and the previous session as well. This is more than timely and extremely welcome in the broader context of the ongoing discussions with a very broad, a very high number of different stakeholders in the EU, but also globally speaking. Of course, cooperation with the partner countries, both producers and consumers, is of crucial importance in this context. I will now give a short presentation on the proposal from the Commission, on the legislative proposal. So maybe just to say that in the first part of the proposal, I will briefly go through the, let's say, the general context and elements, some background, and then I will dive into more specific elements of the proposal. And towards the end, also tell you a little bit more about the outreach that the Commission, the European Commission, has been involved in very actively with the partner countries and a high number of stakeholders. The objectives of the regulation proposal are at the general level to minimize the EU's contribution to deforestation and forest degradation worldwide. This is, of course, absolutely instrumental to achieve the objectives we have set ourselves and also in the partner countries in terms of climate change and biodiversity. So basically, if we don't do more on deforestation and don't do it properly, the objectives on both climate change and biodiversity, we know already, will not be met. The specific objectives of this proposal are to minimize the risk that products coming from supply chains associated with deforestation or forest degradation are placed on the EU market, and to increase the EU demand for and trade in legal and deforestation-free commodities and products. As the background, I will just quickly mention that before presenting the proposal and before actually starting to work on the drafting the proposal, and the Commission always follows a number of strict rules following the better regulation principles, as we call them here in Brussels. And the two most important elements for this background are the fitness check of the already existing regulations, namely the EU Timber Regulation and Flag Regulation, and the impact assessment specifically undertaken in the context of preparing the proposal. On the fitness check and impact assessment, we have presented quite in detail in a number of occasions here, just to say that in terms of EU Timber Regulation, we have clearly detected improvements in raising awareness and transparency in the supply chains. And there have been a number of lessons learned on challenges in implementation, including on operators' ability to validate information obtained from the supply chains. I would add here in this particular context that one of the clear findings was also that the EUTR had very positive effects in terms of cooperation between the EU and both producer and consumer countries, where in a number of cases, actually, the EU has worked very closely, and once again, both producers and consumer countries to set up similar legislation also in the partner countries, which is basically one of the most crucial or the most crucial way of working also as a lesson learned for the new context in terms of preventing leakage, which is something that was mentioned in the introductory words as well. In terms of flag regulation and particularly voluntary partnership agreements, VPAs, the fitness check detected that they were positive in terms of multi-stakeholder dialogues and governance, and there is quite a lot of already existing achievements to further build on. However, it was also clearly shown that these processes can be very long, complex, and resource intensive, both human resources and financially speaking. Unfortunately, after more than 15 years, only one country out of 15 has an operating licensing system in place. That's Indonesia, of course, and that covers only 3% of relevant trade. Just to say that the problem is also that even if all the 15 countries engaged in VPAs were at the licensing stage, which is something very far away at this stage, it would cover only 9% of relevant trade. This basically says that some of the main trade partners for the EU and key countries in terms of environmental challenges have not shown any interest in this approach. On the impact assessment, here I just want to quickly say that the process included, of course, the scientific analysis, the number of stakeholder meetings, in particular multi-stakeholder platform on deforestation with more than 250 participants, of course, also from the partner countries and international organizations, and many targeted interviews within the EU and in partner countries. There was, in general, very high support. That's in terms of percentages, it would be more than 90%, even 95% for binding measures. And the analysis of approximately 20 different options resulted in the selected option, which is the mandatory due diligence with the country benchmarking. Now to go a little bit more in the scope of the regulation, the commodities selected are palm oil, soy, wood, cattle, cocoa, and coffee, and some derived products. It is important to say that this selection is based on very thorough and long analysis and the need to strike the right balance, especially at the beginning. This regulation, of course, applies to both domestically produced and imported commodities and derived products. Related to the first point is actually the progressive scope. So initially, the proposal covers these selected commodities that I mentioned. However, the idea is for the scope to be updated regularly based on the scientific data, of course, and that means the possibility to include a number of other commodities or products or adapt the product scope as necessary. The cutoff date is defined as 31st of December 2020. Commodities will not be allowed to enter the EU market if produced on land subject to deforestation after that date. This date is in line with the international commitments, which actually shows how the EU takes into account and more than takes into account, builds on the commitments from the partner countries, already existing commitments from the partner countries in this regulatory context. And this is especially important because we have to stress that with this regulatory proposal, the EU does not in any way set kind of unilateral measures and working alone. That wouldn't, of course, have any result, but it's here. The objective is actually to help with this proposal to the partner countries to achieve their own national commitments and objectives as defined also internationally in the climate and biodiversity context. Next slide, please. I will now go through the main elements of the proposal. The first one is, of course, the mandatory due diligence rules. These apply to all operators that place the commodities and products on the EU market or export them from the EU. Only the products that are both deforestation-free and legal will be allowed on or exported from the EU market, and they need to be covered by a due diligence statement. A number of these elements, like the due diligence statement, but many others, are actually built on the lessons learned from the already existing legislation, in particular EU timber regulation, but not only, also other examples of regulations in other fields in the at the EU level and elsewhere. These lessons learned are crucial in order to improve the implementation and also to set a good basis for a better cooperation also with the partner countries. The extremely important crucial elements of definitions in the proposal are based on the existing definitions coming from the international work, especially FAO, and also in line with the EU legislation, for example, RED, where our colleagues from DG ENER are in the lead. The main obligations are applicable to both operators and large traders. This is also something, the inclusion of large traders here is an innovation as compared to the EU timber regulation, because we found that their role in terms of ensuring that the supply chains are deforestation free and clean can be particularly central, and also can bring down actually the costs for all other companies in the supply chain, as well as the authorities. This means both within the EU and of course in the partner countries. The next point is absolutely central. It's the strict traceability linking the commodity to the plot of land where it was produced. This is the central element. Without it, basically the whole idea would be put into question. So strict traceability is something that is absolutely crucial as a part of the system. Another element that I want to mention here is the information system, which will host due diligence statements and related information to facilitate enforcement by member states. Next slide, please. The benchmarking system, which was mentioned at the beginning as one of the crucial elements to be further discussed today, will allow to assign risk to countries or parts thereof according to the level of risk of deforestation. It can be low, standard, or high. I cannot stress enough how important the dialogue in information exchange with the partner countries concerned here is. So the idea behind this is, on the one hand, follow up on the requests from the member states in terms of finding ways of lowering the costs for the authorities and the industry, both within the EU and outside. And on the other hand, actually creating a new space for close cooperation between the EU and partner countries to move in the right direction together in terms of halting deforestation. I can already say here that the idea is definitely not to have a high number of countries in the list of high risk, and not at all. That would actually mean that we have failed. The idea is to have as little as possible or none in the list of high risk, and that this would be used only in very exceptional cases. I do want to go a little bit more in detail here, given the specific focus of the meeting today, and say that this builds also on the EU timber regulation experience, where unfortunately, even in the worst cases where there was rampant illegal logging, and here we speak more broadly about deforestation, sometimes at the EU side, the Commission and the member states have actually had limited ways of reacting, and it was clearly felt by the member states' competent authorities, but also the industry, that there was a need to have further clarity and further tools to react in a more appropriate way in these exceptional cases where there are clear and severe problems in terms of in EUTR illegal logging, and here of course deforestation. In EUTR we had the case with Myanmar, a country where since more than 5 years ago in the expert group meetings where the Commission sits with the officials from the competent authorities in member states, the official conclusions of 27 member states and the EU were that because of how system is actually put and how the governmental bodies and the specific situation with the monopoly of state-owned enterprise in Myanmar works, it was not actually possible. It has not been possible to have the relevant information throughout the whole supply chain, which is the basic element of due diligence. But even so, there were quite a number of difficulties then in terms of implementation, although the situation was clear. To cut a long story short, the benchmarking system is in part here to answer to these problems in EU timber regulation, to lower the costs and to make it more efficient, while opening the additional space and incentives for close cooperation between the EU and the partner countries, which is the absolutely clearly central aspect of the system. There are specific obligations for operators and member states authorities, simplified due diligence for low risk and enhanced scrutiny for high risk countries in the system. And this is related, of course, with the minimum level of inspections for the member states authorities to perform, and of course, the effective, proportionate and dissuasive penalties. Next slide, please. The cooperation with partner countries is absolutely crucial, as I mentioned. The imports of commodities and products covered are around 60 billion euros per year. There is no ban against any country or commodity. And the Commission, of course, will step up and has been actually stepping up the cooperation to ensure that EU partners are able to reap the benefits of the new rules on deforestation. I can mention here some of the new or existing tools in this context, which like forest partnerships, but also COCO dialogue, and a number of other programs which sometimes actually are not mentioned that much in this context, but we do need to understand also that there are ongoing programs, for example, on coffee in a number of relevant countries where DG INPA, actually colleagues from DG INPA already work on that, as well as very interesting programs in Latin America on beef in Brazil, or investments in Latin America as a whole, that we definitely can build on and further develop. The Commission will also intensify engagement with consumer countries such as China and US, as well as in international fora, and this is something that we already do. Next slide, please. On the outreach activities, I will not go into detail here, but just to mention that the open public consultation was the second most popular in EU history, following the one on the change of time zones, which is the first one. I already mentioned the multi-stakeholder platform on deforestation involving many third countries, including Brazil, Indonesia, US, China, and many others. And additional feedback and collected at workshops, as well as updating on the participants on the progress. There was extensive interaction with stakeholders, member states, and third countries, also via bilateral meetings. Next slide, please. Just to say that the specific information sessions were organized also for the EU delegations, who on their own are working based on the agreed materials here in Brussels in reaching out locally at the national level in many, many different countries across the globe, actually, on this, not only to present the proposal, but also to keep receiving feedback. There was also a specific explanatory session with their countries' ambassadors to the EU on 12th of January, aimed at explaining the proposal, conveying key messages, and then with the possibility to submit additional questions. And this actually is ongoing, and the Commission is preparing a joint reply to the questions received. Next slide, please. There were and there are still many local workshops in third countries. Possibly the participants to this event today have participated in some of these. I will mention here just the example of Ivory Coast or China, for example. Also explanatory session in multi-stakeholder processes like in Cocoa Dialogue, International Cocoa or Coffee organizations, and many events and very intensive work in the multi and plurilateral fora, including specific presentations and interchange with partner countries in the World Trade Organization, United Nations, G7, G20, ASEAN, and many others. Next slide, please. As a key takeaways, I would like to stress here that this regulation aims to enhance trade in products from deforestation-free supply chains, creating more sustainable supply chains. This will help both the EU and partner countries, authorities and industry to step up the work on halting the deforestation. It will have an impact on suppliers, of course, both in EU and in the partner countries, but the EU is ready to work closely with and support the partner countries' efforts to create deforestation-free supply chains. The regulation is based on the following principles. First, transparency, accountability, and sound scientific and methodological basis. Second, consistency with the agreed international commitments, notably halting deforestation at the levels December 2020 in line with the SDG 15, and here the EU actually aims to help the partner countries to achieve the objectives that they set themselves. And third, non-discrimination as it equally treats domestic and imported commodities and products and covers both imports and exports. And next slide, please. We need to bear in mind this regulation is part of the broader set of policies. As you know, there was in 2019 the communication, the so-called communication on deforestation communication, where we have 5 main areas of work. The first one is reducing the EU consumption footprint, where also, among other activities, the new proposal fits. But the second and third one, and of course fourth and fifth, are equally important. So the work on the legislation is just one piece of the puzzle, and it will work only as long as we are very actively developing all the other activities as identified in the annex of this communication in 2019. The second and third element, the area of work, are particularly relevant in the context of today's meeting, which is working in partnerships with producing countries and strengthening international cooperation, including with international organizations and consumer countries. This work is already ongoing, and what I wish to stress here is that this is the broader work of the EU and the member states together with the partner countries. Not all of these elements should nor can actually be expected to be reflected in the regulation itself. So regulation is just one piece of the puzzle, and the idea is not, and it couldn't be, to have all the other elements mentioned on this slide and as identified in the communication in 2019 to have that covered in the legislation. That simply is not part of the legislative work, especially in terms of, for example, programming related to cooperation and development, but also all the other outreach that I already mentioned in previous cases. The support to producing countries and dialogue with other consumer countries and cooperation at international level, especially in the relevant fora, is absolutely crucial. With consumer countries, we shouldn't forget that is, and also that's a lesson learned from the FLEGT and EU timber regulation experience. That's absolutely crucial in terms of leakage. As one example of successful cooperation there, I wish to stress I wish to mention the example of close cooperation between the EU and China on illegal logging, which actually resulted, of course, that was the work on the Chinese side, but we worked very closely from the EU and member states with China, with the result of actually having a regulation, legislation in China on illegal logging, which was not in place before. This is quite a crucial element, globally speaking, in fighting illegal logging, and we want to build on that to ensure that similar evolution, similar developments are there also for deforestation, and that is crucial for leakage. Partnerships and cooperation are important to promote the transition to sustainable agricultural production, sustainable forest management, and the development of transparent supply chains. Without partnerships, even the best regulation in one particular country, or in this case in the EU, will definitely not do the trick. So I think that this was my last slide. Thank you very much. And I'm very much looking forward to hearing from other panelists and also to the lively discussion after that. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Bojan. Let's proceed directly with Lisa.
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, Lisa, we can hear you. Well, now you're muted. Yeah, now again.
Okay, thank you very much. So sorry for that you cannot see me, but it's about content, not and to another occasion. I hope I can add my face. So thank you very, very much for organizing this very important discussion, and congratulations to my colleague Bojan from DG Envy once more. This is a very important step we are going forward, and it's an excellent proposal. Yeah, just to again as well setting the stage from our perspective. I think everybody shares it. Climate, biodiversity, agriculture, and people depend on forests, and without their ecosystem services, there will be no agriculture and food production. So it's not only about environmental tasks, but we're in the midst of the basis of our life. And thus, it should be really of high interest of businesses that will achieve an ambitious regulation. So this is why, as well, in the perspective of our partner countries and partners, the BMZ strongly supports this ambitious EU regulation. And with the aim to minimize illegal and legal deforestation in the European supply chains. So in our perspective, this is really a very good element in the smart mix of measures we need to work on, and the combination of due diligence and benchmarking is the right step forward, and learning from the FLEG system, the EUTR. So I think there's big progress which is happening right now. So the elements, especially of geolocalization coordinates of the plot of land of production, and the benchmarking or the provisions for a harmonized and stringent law enforcement across the EU are very, very important elements. And we absolutely support that. Nevertheless, maybe in short, what we would still suggest is to expand the scope to at least natural rubber. We work as well on rubber, on sustainable rubber, and the crowding out effects within BMZ. And it would be extremely helpful to extend as well the proposal to other ecosystems because of the crowding out effects and because of their provision for environmental services and biodiversity protection. And in addition, we see the strong need to mainstream informal and formal land rights for indigenous people and local communities, as well as free, prior, and informed consent in the proposal. We cannot rely on the human rights due diligence regulation, which is just starting, about to start. And so we really have to make sure that we cover that. And so it's better to start with these aspects here to have it safe. We would have liked to see the measures expand also to the financial sector, as investments should also follow due diligence criteria in our view. We think it was an important step in Glasgow that the financial sector wants to have forest positive finance. So I think we should keep on working on that. And in recognition of the situation of, in particular, smallholders, BMZ will aim to integrate stronger provisions on risk mitigation measures to set incentives for companies to engage with their suppliers and provide trainings and capacity building. There will be transformation, and it's to achieve eco-social value chains, but we have to see that it's very important to do this in a social, in a just way, and so we call it socially just transition. Very important to us as BMZ, as you can imagine. So as Bojan already mentioned, to BMZ, it's very, very important the aspect of cooperation with partner countries on producer and consumer side, as indicated in the Article 28 of the proposal. And so the Commission and EU member states, really we have to work closely with partner countries to hold deforestation driven by agriculture at the same time foster the rights and livelihoods of indigenous people and local communities, there including smallholders, through, for example, living income strategies and ecosystem payments, a big elephant in the room as well. If you look at the climate agenda, who can pay for all of that? Very, very important discussion for us and our new government in Germany. To that end, we would be interested in hearing more from the Commission about links between the benchmarking and cooperation with producer countries. From our perspective, the benchmarking must be grounded in best evidence available and in the ultimate decision-making power. And the ultimate decision-making power must lay in the hands of the Commission. Nevertheless, we see a clear role for development cooperation and consultations with partner countries and stakeholders along the benchmarking process, notably when it comes to increasing risks. And when it comes to the criteria, the benchmarking should be based on clear criteria and definitions, notably regarding relevant laws and partner countries. It should include the rights of indigenous people and local communities, as well as the concept of free, prior, informed consent. I already mentioned this. It needs to be closely tied to this. And this is to avoid leakage and spillover effects. We suggest including in the criteria also the conversion of other ecosystems in case they would not be covered anyway. So we should bring it in here. And production trends of other commodities. So, not to look only on these commodities here on the table, but look at right and left. It's about maize, sugar, sweet corn sugar, and caoutchouc anyway. So to make Article 28 more specific, BMZ would like to encourage the Commission to come forward with a separate strategy on concrete, systematic producing side measures, including forest partnerships and the Team Europe initiative approaches. And this strategy should aim to create incentives for forest preservation at deforestation hotspots and support public and private governance for forest preservation at the deforestation frontiers. And thereby the EU needs to support both with compliance with the regulation and aim for impact beyond its immediate supply chain. At the same time, the strategy should make clear how the EU Forest Partnership and Team Europe initiatives on all levels will complement the forthcoming regulation. We expect a close alignment of EU forest partnerships with the new regulation. They're a good tool, so we really have to use it. And of course, we as member states would absolutely support these developments. And BMZ will be more than happy to contribute really to such a strategy. We have a long track record of support for forest preservation with partner countries. in different partner countries, which were already mentioned. And we work as well with OECD and FAO, developing a handbook on deforestation, forest degradation, and due diligence in supply chains as a handbook for companies. And together with France, with our key partner, who are with the presidency, we are currently initiating a global Team Europe initiative on deforestation-free supply chains and invite other member states to join. So we're in the midst of discussion because we think this regulation needs one global project to cover all the different questions of differently affected partner countries. And then we are as well joined forces with DG Impact, and we are about to set up a new program on minimizing deforestation, driven by both domestic and international demand in 4 partner countries. And this could be a very important element for a future Team Europe initiative. So yeah, I really thank for this discussion, and we are very interested what our fellow panelists, notably from partner countries, think about that. I have to apologize that I have to leave this discussion right now because we are in the midst of discussion with DG Impact, and we have a very urgent meeting. But my GIZ expert colleague Franziska Rau is here to answer Q&As, and you can send me as well an email within the next hour. I'm happy to answer by typing. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Lisa. And of course, we know that next to DG Environment, DG INPA is also very closely working on the issue of cooperation. And we see that you are busy with that just in this very moment. So have a nice day and thanks for participating. Julia.
Yes, let me just share my screen. Hang on just a second. Yes. Okay. Hello. So thanks for inviting me to this discussion. It was really great to hear the very interesting comments just now by Bojan and Lisa. So as Maria explained, I work for Fern. We're an NGO who've been working a lot on this deforestation regulation. We're mostly based in Brussels, but I'm frequently also in West Africa as well because I work a lot on the cocoa supply chain. So I'm here to share our thoughts on this topic, which I would say is still the missing other half of the EU Deforestation Regulation. I think our views on the matter may be summarized by this image, which is from our tweet responding to the regulation, which is we are very positive about the regulation, but there's still some quite important missing elements to the strategy in order for it to have an impact on global deforestation, which should, I think, be the aim. I think it's interesting, it was Bojan presented the objectives of the regulation in his presentation, and I find it quite telling because the objective of this regulation is to minimize the EU's contribution to deforestation, which if you look back at the EU, the flagged action plan, the objective was to contribute to the fight against illegal logging, which I think is a shrinking of ambition, I think, for the EU. I think the lack of vision on partnerships reflects this, is a product of this shrinking in ambition, I think, of wanting to tackle the global problem. I'm sure maybe Bojan will disagree, but that's how I see it. So why are partnerships with producer countries important? 3 reasons. Firstly is this thing I just mentioned about this, I'm concerned that there's a desire to wash our hands of the problem rather than to fix the global problem. Partnerships would enable the EU to use the regulation as a leverage to clean up production across the whole country, not just the supply chains headed to the EU. I think what we really don't want is a sort of the result of a 2-tier system where clean production is going to Europe and deforestation continues on the ground and just gets either consumed domestically or exported elsewhere. Second reason is I think there's a potential legal minefield on the horizon. The EU law deforestation proposal requires compliance with domestic law and producer countries. This has received less attention because everybody's concerned with the zero deforestation criteria, but legality is even more complicated than zero deforestation because it involves things like tenure rights, which are often very complex and not clear exactly what they are. I think what was smart about the VPAs is they focused on trying to clarify what domestic law actually is. We don't have, not yet is there a strategy to do this, but I think it's quite urgent to have in-country discussions on that, and partnerships can help to achieve that. The third reason is that you can't get something for nothing. Maria explained this as well, but the EU, I think, is rightly imposing additional demands on producer countries, which require them to step up, sometimes significantly, in things like traceability, which, like I said, we agree with and support, but they cost money and they cost time. And it's important that both parties are bringing something to the table. And partnerships should be two-sided and not only involve accountability for actors in producer countries, but also for European actors on sustainability issues such as commodity price, which are important to producer countries. So it should really be a partnership on two sides, not only one. So how is the EU performing on delivering such partnerships? So far, and I would agree with Lisa on this, the regulatory proposal lacks a clear vision on such partnerships. Bojan has mentioned a link between the benchmarking and in-country dialogues, but which I am reassured to hear that the Commission sees it that way. But from the text, I don't get a clear sense of that. So maybe more is planned, which would be good. Maybe in a delegated act or another strategy document, I'm not sure. There are some hooks for partnerships in the regulatory proposal in the benchmarking Article 27 and the Article 28 on cooperation with producer countries, but it's really not clear what the in-country processes should look like. The Article 28 is a sort of catch-all of various issues related to forest. It doesn't lay out a sort of how-to of how such partnerships should look like. And it's not clear what the link is with the regulation and those partnerships. The European Commission has, as Bojan mentioned, been working with producer countries on an ad hoc basis via things like the cocoa talks, forest partnerships, etc. I do feel concerned, I recently visited a producer region and various countries within that region, and I did touch base with the European donors and the EU delegations there. I don't have the impression that there is a clear strategy behind funding. I think funding is being given, sort of being given out without a real strategy. That's my impression in at least one of the countries. I'm not necessarily true for the others, but so I think it's not clear at all what the outcome is being aimed at. Questions could not be answered on what is the theory of change. And so I do really see a risk of a lot of talking and a lot of money being spent with very few results. And in this sense, I do really worry that this is, at least as it is at the moment, I'm not saying the situation can't change, and I do think it's still early days, but at the moment, this is a significant step backwards from the level of strategic thinking behind flagged VPAs. So I think many things can be critiqued about VPAs, but there are also some elements that are very strong, and I don't feel that these are being replicated or learned from in other commodity sectors, at least not from what I can see on the ground. So I would urge the EC to do more thinking about that, I think. So here's some idea. It's just my idea, and I'm not the EC, so I can't tell them exactly what to do, but I think it's really important that in-country partnerships are working towards a clear outcome and via a clear process, which are set in writing and agreed by all parties since the outset, rather than having sort of random spending on various projects. So, sorry. I think step one of that would be to firstly identify the issues that the producer country wants the partnership to resolve. Step two would be to study the gap between the EU regulation and the situation on the ground in terms of compliance. I think that's very important. I don't see that being done yet. That can also be done with in-country stakeholders quite usefully, I think. Where are the risks of non-compliance? Where does support need to be targeted to? Thirdly, to agree on a time-bound roadmap of how to address those issues that are important to the producer countries and the gap between the EU regulation and the situation on the ground, that include clear sort of accountabilities for all actors and a theory of change. I think VPA process is a very useful experience in terms of doing this kind of thing by a multi-stakeholder discussion. Fourthly, to implement that roadmap with technical and financial support from the EU if it's desired, which it may not be. And then fifthly, to recognize progress along that roadmap by benchmarking, as has already been discussed, or via other financial mechanisms, which Lisa also mentioned, which I think are interesting. So just to make it a bit more concrete, I can give an example of how that maybe could work in the cocoa sector. So in terms of identifying the issues the producer country wants the partnership to discuss, I think the key one in that case is the low and unstable price of cocoa. And it was very interesting. Last week during their visit to Brussels, Ghana and Cote d'Ivoire mentioned the idea of an economic pact for sustainable cocoa, which would take the price as a departure point. I think this is extremely interesting. And I think it would be great for the European Commission to build on what looks like a sort of offer of a partnership that's coming from the producer countries and really build it on the basis of what they're interested in. I think this would be really smart. Secondly, in terms of studying the gap between the EU regulation and the situation on the ground, this, again, I can't do that. This needs to be done by people in country, but I would imagine this would include things like the fact that the definition of national law is not clear, particularly on tree tenure. Traceability to the farm level isn't yet established. Smallholder farmers are not aware the regulation is coming up, this kind of thing. Some of these studies have already been done, but I think there hasn't yet been a comprehensive one. Thirdly, to agree via a multi-stakeholder process in country on a time-bound roadmap of how to address those gaps and issues. So in the case of cocoa, that would be, implementing a higher price. I think that discussion will be very interesting, and I really hope that the EC takes up the producer countries' request to have a conversation on that issue. Coming up with a national legality definition, completing mapping of farms, completing the national traceability systems, which both Ghana and Cote d'Ivoire are working on. That can go hand in hand with tree tenure clarification. I understand that Ghana is doing it that way, as well as independent monitoring by local NGOs. And then also, finally, for example, developing a program with farmers, cooperatives, and local NGOs to inform cocoa farmers. Those are just examples. I can't do the roadmap myself, but those are the kind of things that might appear. Fourthly, implement the roadmap and involving in-country actors like local NGOs and farmers, cooperatives. They're absolutely key. I think it won't be possible without them. And then finally, recognize progress along that roadmap via benchmarking, potentially, as well as some of these interesting financial mechanisms. We've talked informally about maybe a redistribution mechanism linked to the carbon border adjustment mechanism, maybe in-country payment for ecosystem services. I think there's lots of interesting ideas out there that could be discussed. So what are the next steps? I would ask decision makers who have control over the regulation itself to ensure that so that's the MEPs and the member states at this stage, to amend the regulations such that benchmarking includes strong criteria on legality, including land rights. Currently, it's quite heavily focused on deforestation, and legality is only considered in relation to deforestation. Country risk assessment, this is an idea. I'm not sure how it would work, but maybe country risk assessment could be delayed by a few years so that there's a sort of, the regulation should come into force as soon as possible, but then there's like a window of opportunity where there would be time to work on a roadmap to get ready to have an acceptable risk rating before, because I have the impression producer countries are quite worried about the risk rating, which is interesting given that the consequences are not that significant, but they're very worried, I think, about the reputational impact. And then also ensuring that the high risk benchmark does really trigger a national multi-stakeholder dialogue. This is not in the text at the moment. I wouldn't call what's in there really a dialogue. I think it looks more like a notification and then chance to prepare a response. And I think it could be more robust. And then I think the European Commission, I would agree with Lisa that there's a need for a strategy or communication on roadmaps and partnerships. That could be something like the 5-step process I've just described, but I'm sure that could be improved. It's just off the top of my head. And finally, I think this is important. I think that donors should make sure that their funding supports that 5-step process and that it's really used to help countries prepare for the regulation and not for other things. So yeah, that's my final slide. So I look forward to the discussion.
Thank you very much, Julia, for this thought-provoking intervention. Now, we have heard our first 3 speakers and have received a lot of information, and I'm sure, a lot of thought-provoking things. And as I invite the panelists to react to each other, I would like to add that I'm thankful to Bojan for having mentioned or emphasized that, in fact, this regulation should be seen as part of a broader package, and that is perhaps sometimes not entirely clear in the discussion, but it is indeed the case that this regulation focuses on the EU demand side. And there's other measures that are supposed to be developed to also support cooperation. However, it is of course important that both supply side and demand side work in synergy together, and that there is some sort of coherence between instruments, which is why the link between Article 27 and 28 remains a very important, yet at the moment not very clear topic. So perhaps Bojan could further clarify, at what stage the Commission currently is in developing a vision for cooperation and partnership mechanisms, and perhaps also help us understand what the reasoning is behind leaving the form and nature of these partnerships so widely open in the current proposal. So, but Bojan, feel free to respond to whatever comment or thought that has been expressed so far.
Thank you very much, and thanks also for the excellent presentations by the colleagues. In particular, I found the presentation by Julia extremely clear and helpful in identifying a number of very important elements in terms of cooperation and development work. I believe we can confirm that this is. Do you hear me? Hello?
Yes, I can still hear you.
Sorry. Okay, so I continue. Sorry, I had a small problem here.
Yeah.
So in terms of the elements for cooperation and development, this was, I think, super useful, and I can confirm that the Commission and especially the colleagues in DG Infra are looking on all of these, also based on our previous experiences. Now, in terms of the emphasis that you are giving, also in terms of framing this event to the interplay between the Article 28 on cooperation and Article 27 on benchmarking, I feel that we need to make a step back and then clarify that the Article 28 on the cooperation is not related in any way only to the Article 27. The Article 28 on cooperation is related to all the other articles. So I'm a bit surprised that here there is this specific emphasis on the relation with benchmarking when you have much, let's not say much more important, but other crucial elements all across the regulation, like the traceability, like the geolocation that was mentioned by the colleagues from BMZ, which are absolutely crucial, and where the Article 28 kicks in as a central one in the sense of partnerships and working together with the partner countries. So I'm not entirely sure why this event is being framed as if the focus of the Article 28, or as if cooperation in general should have some kind of specific relation with Article 28 on benchmarking, while maybe a little bit less on other elements. I think that that view might be particularly limiting, given that the cooperation with partner countries is absolutely crucial on all other elements, and specifically on due diligence, and namely on traceability. And there is actually where we see the particular specific element in ensuring that cooperation and development programs work with the industry and with the authorities and with the stakeholders themselves, to ensure that the support to the smallholders is provided in the right way, specifically in those areas where this is more needed. And that can be related, but not necessarily, but that can be related with the benchmarking. Why? Because the benchmarking is an element which, on top of making the whole system more effective, namely by lowering the costs for the industry and authorities, both within the EU and outside, and opening the space for close cooperation with the partner countries, the benchmarking, we can imagine in a couple of years that it will actually provide a very clear overview based on the scientific approach and including all the elements already identified in the legislation, but also others. It will provide a clear overview which are the areas, globally speaking, with particular challenges. That will be a very good way to ensure that the priorities are clear. In other words, if there are some specific areas, and I wish to re-stress what I already said, that the idea is not to have a long list of high-risk countries. The idea is to have a very short list or none there in very exceptional cases. But if there are these exceptional cases, and I mentioned only one under the EUTR, so we could imagine that this would be a very limited number, then the benchmarking will help the EU and the member states, also the industry and the partner countries, to identify those areas where help and support is most needed. And that is extremely important because we know that the resources are limited, also in terms of cooperation and development. So benchmarking can be extremely helpful in order to say, okay, if we have an area of a country which maybe is not of high risk, but there is the risk that the country might become in some time, or might need to be considered to be put on the list of high risk, that's a clear signal for the EU and the member states, and also for other partners, to work in that area, because that's the area where help is more needed. And I wish to stress there also that given that the regulation does not include the ban, let's say going towards a high risk in a particular area, which once again should be very exceptional, this will not affect the industry or the operators and the industry working in the area who work with the clean supply chains. So for them, nothing changes. There is no ban. And why is this important? It's important from the lessons learned also from the EU timber regulation, because it's exactly these industry, these operators, these companies who work with the clean supply chains that can and have to be an example for the others. That was the problem in Myanmar with EU timber regulation, that actually there was no example, but there was no example because there was a problem with the government who really excluded the possibility to check on one part of the supply chain. So that example is very particular, and we know that Myanmar has very particular political situation, so that we don't accept in other countries. In all other countries, basically, our experience was working on illegal logging that there were good examples. And what we need to do is to use, the idea is to use the benchmarking, not by putting countries or areas as high risk, but by flagging that there might be problems, identifying them as a priority areas to support, and work with or learning from those operators that actually have supply chains to replicate that or adapt that to, for example, smallholders or others. That is where we believe that support is most needed. And this is how actually this can very positively work with the cooperation programs. This is how we see it as a motivation for further and clearer prioritization to support the industry and the authorities, of course, in these areas that might not be high risk as such, but might be, let's say, in a risk to be considered, or I mean, let's say that there might be the need to start conversation in terms of benchmarking to avoid to avoid being considered as high risk. I would maybe then mention just a couple of other things in terms of how this will work. And there was a question also in question and answers. I believe the second question was there on the bottlenecks or timings. Just to bear in mind that this is not for tomorrow. So you will have seen in the proposal that there is a mention of implementing act, and procedurally speaking, this takes time. So it will not be immediately, let's say, not now, and possibly or very probably, speaking from the experience and internal procedures, because then you need to go through all the, not only Commission, but also member states and others. This can take a bit of time. So what Julia said in terms of 5 years, well, I don't think, in my view, probably this could come earlier, but actually in terms of time, we will have the authorities in the member states, industry here, and also third countries will have time to prepare for the system to kick in. And this is very good, because this time will allow us to be better prepared to make the best use of the system. And the best use means, as I said, on the one hand, and you have to take that into account also from the member states' competent authorities perspective, or also operators in the EU, this more effective approach and more let's say, transparency, and that lowers costs. And on the other hand, absolutely crucial, maybe even more important, I would dare to say, to open the space for close dialogues with the partner countries. That's a little bit how I see it. And I do wish to maybe mention something else. I heard a number of elements that Julia mentioned in terms of learning from the FLEGT experience. We can just confirm and very much that all the good elements from not only FLEGT, including VPAs and EU timber regulation, but also other experiences we already have, we need to absolutely build on them and work further, especially in the partner countries, but also here. So I can just confirm that there is absolutely no element that has worked well or achievements that we already have that we would in any way put aside. And thinking about some incredible achievements which maybe usually are not that visible, or we don't mention them that often. Sorry, I'm thinking about the fact of how we work with China, where for the first time ever around the table in an official meeting between the representatives of the EU and the member states and the Chinese official representative authorities, we had in Beijing also representatives of the industry and NGOs at the table speaking freely, basically participating actively in an official formal meeting between the EU and China. That is remarkable. Now, I'm not saying only in the terms of deforestation of forests. This is remarkable in general cooperation with China. And we had a very similar experience in Laos, where of course the national system, national political context is very different, for example, from the EU member states, and the access to the civil society, in general, to the processes is different, more limited. We had, in the forestry context, for the first time, colleagues from civil sector sitting in the official meetings there. And this was recognized not only by the colleagues working on the FLEGT processes, but in general as a breakthrough at the national level, as an example for other areas of work. So things like this and many, many more, we definitely need to build on. And I think that actually in the elements that Julia identified in some of the slides for further work, this is all covered, and we can just subscribe to that. But I stop now at the moment and just invite everyone to not look at the cooperation, and in particular Article 28, only in relation with the benchmarking, but also all the other elements of the regulation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Bojan, for clarifying this. Julia, would you like to react directly to that?
Yeah, just do a couple of things that Bojan said. So thanks, that was really interesting to have all that information. I'm not sure at what point and in what form the strategy will be communicated, but I think it would be really useful at some point to have that more in writing, but I'm sure that's planned and it takes time. But yes, including on sort of elements from FLEGT. And I think speaking about that, I think one element that I really felt strongly, having just come back from visiting West Africa, I think one thing that would really make a lot of sense to take from FLEGT is the multi-stakeholder legality definition process. I think that this was at the core of what NGOs found most useful, and I think we're able to make the most of in the producer countries. And I think it would make a lot of sense in the context of this regulation, given the legality requirements. So this is like a concrete thing that I think really could be taken from FLEGT. And then one other final point. Yes, I agree with Bojan. He's right. I think the process of giving the country risk ratings will probably take about 5 years, but I think it's important to maybe communicate that more clearly with a year by which that will happen, because although those of us within the EU bubble understand that people in producer countries don't, and producer country governments don't, so they're really, I mean, it's interesting, the thing they seem to react to that almost the most is the risk rating, which like I said, I find a little strange, but it's interesting. And I think saying clearly this is going to come into place in 2027, I think also has the benefit of giving a hard deadline that may be also a motivator for progress as well as being a bit reassuring. So that's why I think I made that proposal. But thanks a lot for the clarifications, Bojan.
Thank you, Julia. I see that there's some questions in the audience and we are running a bit late in our first round. So I would suggest that I now ask the people from the audience to ask their questions, and then we go to Minang and Obed, and perhaps they can already then react to the first three presentations. So I have a question from Arnaud Bonisoli, and I will try to unmute you now so that you can ask the question. Are you there, Arnaud?
Yes, I am. Thank you very much.
So please go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. The question is for actually the full panel, with certainly a bigger focus for Bojan. Thank you very much for the presentation, everyone. I'm working as a consultant in the derivative sector. The derivative is everything linked to personal care, home care, cosmetic, and there is a use of palm oil mainly, but through a really long supply chain involving a lot of chemical and mechanical transformation, which make it really complicated to link it to a specific production area. So as per today, it's impossible to have any certification which could provide for specific area of production, and it will not be possible for certainly few years. So the full derivative sector is quite an important sector for the European Union. It's an important sector not only for the big company, but a lot of small and medium companies in cosmetic, etc., home care, which are developing. And with that regulation, it will be impossible to have access to the main raw material for the product. And they will have to switch to other type of commodities, for instance, coconut, which is having a really bad impact on the environment, on the deforestation, because of the less efficiency of the commodity. I mean, and also actually the scope of the regulation will be limited to the product coming out of refinery, making it, I mean, like counterproductive for the European companies in the oleochemical market compared to their competitors outside of the territory of the EU, which will not face the same requirements. So, I mean, there's like a full and global supply chain is always complicated, and there is some complex supply chain that will certainly suffer from the shortcut of the regulation, I would say. My question is, did you take into account in the construction of the regulation of the full landscape and the consequences for the European market at the end, economically, socially, and geopolitically? Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. And we have a related question by an anonymous attendee that asks how the proposed regulation affects the derivatives market, for example, palm oil derivatives. Is there a requirement for full traceability also for them? If so, how would it be enforced given the lack of free deforestation certified supply? So perhaps these two questions can be taken together. I will also now, I would like to give the floor also to Tim Hartle, who also has submitted a question. Could you please identify yourself, presenting yourself quickly and ask your question?
Yes, hello.
Hi.
Perfect. So, yeah, my name is Tim Hartle. I work for CEPF, the Confederation of European Forest Owners. And yeah, the forest owners will be among the ones having to implement the new regulation. And my question was about the country benchmarking system. I was wondering, as all countries will first automatically be categorized as standard risk, how the Commission will ensure that they are not stuck in the standard risk, while they would in fact be low or high risk. And maybe to even extend my question a little bit, I was wondering that the standard and high risk category have the exact same obligations for operators. The only additional thing in the high risk category would be enhanced scrutiny. So couldn't there be like some simplifications in the standard risk category to make it more gradual? Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. In the interest of time, I will also ask the other two persons who submitted questions to briefly summarize them. So first, Elke Verhagen. Have to unmute you. Here you are. Elke, hello.
Yes, hello. I had a question about, so it was mentioned that the EU would, through partnerships, also promote sustainable agriculture. Now, I think that within Europe, within the European Union, we kind of have a mixed record about that. We have the farm to fork strategy, sure, but we also have the common agricultural policy, which is very much influenced by the agro-industry. And so sustainable agriculture is very often interpreted as precision farming, other technological innovations. So if I hear the European Commission saying we want to promote sustainable agriculture, I'm a little bit worried. So I'm wondering what that would look like, or what the idea is, or how this, would go. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much. I have one more question, but it is directed, among others, to Obed, and I would actually like to move on to the second round soon, in which we can then address that question. For now, would any of you like to pick up the questions that were just raised?
If you wish, maybe I can quickly address some of the questions. First, thank you very much for the questions. And now on the first question, also the interesting element of the product scope, and then the comparison between the coconut oil or palm oil, we need to bear in mind that in the general context, our impact assessment, which is published on our websites, has covered all of this. So we've looked into many different commodities, and this is a result of very thorough analysis, and also very broad stakeholders consultations. In terms of switching from one commodity to another, we don't expect this. Why? Because I mean, especially in terms of possibly, for example, coconut oil being much more detrimental for the environment than the palm oil. This is not so simple, because what we need to bear in mind is that this regulation does not provide for any kind of ban of palm oil or painting palm oil or something bad. No commodity is bad per se. It's about how the commodity is produced. And by actually ensuring that the supply chains related to those commodities covered are clean, the result can only be positive. And we do not expect to have a kind of switching from one to another. Also because there are economic elements that do not point in that direction. On top of that, I do want to mention that the product scope is progressive, as I mentioned. So we do expect further updates and changes, including possible inclusion of other commodities and products in the future. And that will depend, that kind of regular updates, which could be, I mean, it's very difficult to say in terms of years. And this also goes with for the benchmarking in terms of 5 years or less or more. But regular updates every 2-3 years, let's say, will ensure that if any problem of this kind of nature is detected, that it can be solved, it can be dealt with. In terms of the timing for the benchmarking, as I mentioned, this is a little bit difficult to say because of the processes. So saying one certain year now would not be possible, because we need to go through the process, and we don't know how much the process will take. And we also have learned from the FLEGT experience to a certain degree that sometimes saying dates, it can be positive, it can be motivating, but sometimes maybe not, because if you say a lot of dates and then they all pass, sometimes the credibility, or it's a little bit at least. But this is another issue. So just to say, it would be great to have to be able already to say now, in 2027 this will work, but unfortunately I don't think that this is possible at this point. There was one thing that was mentioned in terms of the possibility to have a kind of differentiation between the due diligence between high risk and standard risk countries. And if I understood correctly, there was a suggestion that maybe from the standard risk we should have simplified due diligence. This is, I have to be very clear on this one. This is something where the Commission definitely does not want to go. Why? We do have that covered in this proposal by low-risk countries. But on that side as well, low-risk countries, we do not expect to have enormous amount of countries as low risk, but standard risk can definitely not imply kind of simplified due diligence. Standard risk is, as the word says, standard. So we need a standard due diligence, the whole due diligence process as described in this regulation. And this is something that we also learned from EU timber regulation. So if we expect that actually the majority of countries will in general be on the standard list, we definitely need the whole due diligence requirements there. Otherwise, the regulation could be considered as possibly a giant loophole in general. So that is definitely something that we do not consider, to have a simplified due diligence for standard risk countries. That's not the case. We do believe that, as it was rightly said, that the difference in terms of the number of checks and enhanced scrutiny in terms of high risk actually answers to the issues related with the high risk. And then in terms of sustainable agriculture, what is that? I do not wish to now enter into discussions on definitions of what the different stakeholders might understand as sustainable agriculture. But in our context here, in the context of this proposal, this is actually very simple. Sustainable agriculture is the one that has clean, deforestation-free supply chains. So agriculture that does not contribute to deforestation. That in this case is very very simple to a certain degree. If you think about the maybe broader context, I would stop there for the moment. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Bojan. I think it is now a good moment to also hear from our other speakers, namely Minang and Obed. Minang, would you like to take the floor?
I think I can do it, through my presentation, because it's, in a sense, just like a response to this.
That would be perfect. Thank you.
Shall I just share my screen?
Yes, go ahead.
Okay, thank you for the opportunity to speak in this event. This is just the initial reading or thoughts about the EU DDR or EU due diligence regulation proposal by the EU that's just been explained by Bojan just now. So I would like to introduce, first I'll tell about my organization. I'm working with the Kaum Telapak, or I'm the chairperson of Kaum Telapak, that is an environmental organization, a member-based organization based in Indonesia. And we work to achieve ecological justice and by exposing problems and working towards policy reforms. Also, we work to promote community-based livelihood initiative. And we have been working in the past 2 decades to improve forest governance in Indonesia through our works in illegal logging and associated trade. And we are also actively engaged. We have been actively engaged in the implementation of FLEGT Action Plan, namely through FLEGT VPA and the EUTR. I think Bojan might is familiar with our work, yeah. So with regard to this EU DDR proposal, we really appreciate the initiative and agree that addressing demand side is important to fight deforestation and climate crisis. But this is already mentioned by Julia, cleaning up the supply chain to the EU does not necessarily mean that it will help reducing global deforestation unless this measures is developed and implemented in a way that can lead to improved policies and their implementation in producing countries. Because if the EU, then this is also one thing that I noticed from Bojan's presentation, when Bojan said that the main goal is to really clear that it is to just very like EU centric, if you like, yeah. So is to reduce EU contribution, and my concern is also the same as Julia, that if that's that's the way that this regulation will be implemented and want to achieve, then it could be that the producing countries shift their market to less sensitive ones, or to, you know, like in my country it's already happening, yeah, have some sort of like, oh, it's okay, then we can just use the products to maybe for domestic consumption, and in the end it will not achieve, I think, the overall objective of reducing global deforestation. And also this will, I think, yeah, if we are talking about changes in the EU consumption without trying to trigger or trying to drive the overall reforms in the country, it will create like only a certain players or you know, stakeholders can comply with these measures, and other players can be sidelined, such as the smallholders. Right. So this is the experience from the Indonesian. Hang on a second. How do I? From the Indonesian and EU VPA. Oh, sorry. So in Indonesia, we built the timber legality assurance system through a multi-stakeholder process even before entering the VPA negotiation. So this is purely based on the national process, if you like, and it was through a multi-stakeholder. So the ownership of the system is pretty big. And the VPA process, which later come, have helped Indonesia in improving and finalizing the system. And it was through a very, I have to say, because I was directly involved in this process, it was quite intensive and extensive, like the close cooperation between the EU and the Indonesian parts. Yeah, it really. And it really, how you call it? It really played a big role in helping moving the process forward, and as a result, Indonesia has become the first country to have a FLEGT license for its timber and wood products export. And Boyan had said that out of 15 countries, only one, and that one country is Indonesia. And because we come from a very bad place in terms of illegal logging and also forest destruction, the amount of work that needs to be done is also huge. That's why we did like the it's like you have to do the overhaul of the system. It's basically from no existing system to have like a working system to verify legality and also sustainability. Actually, this process has overall helping in improving the forest governance in Indonesia, including through the FLEGT VPA to strengthen or to reinforce the transparency through the information system, access of information to the independent monitors that under this process also have been formally recognized by the government. And under this process as well, the smallholders and SMEs for timber and wood products have gotten support and have, if I may say, in Indonesia, in the past 10 years, have played a big role in Indonesian wood industry. However, incentive seems to be lacking, and this is from the recent Joint Implementation Committee meeting, that the report by the Independent Market Monitoring shows that only a minority of importers are importing more product from Indonesia since licensing. And also from the trade statistics, from the trade statistic, can be shown that there is no significant improvement in the volume of trade, even though like the value for some products, they are increasing, but there is no significant improvement. Well, some, obviously has been affected by the pandemic, but and also it's flexi licensing is not the only factor to affect better trade or better market shares, but this is what especially private sectors have been raising. And also, in general, they also question about the implementation of the UTR, as they feel that the non-flexi licensed timber and wood products can as easily enter in the EU market. Even some of them said that how come we have to face like even like same restriction, checkings and stuff like that, even though from year to year, based on the inspection of competent authorities, the number of problematic, if you like, flexi license in Indonesia has been significantly decreasing. The last one last year is only like 0.27% of all the flexi license issued to the EU. And the other thing that the EU is perceived as not holding their ends of the bargain. This is about the Article 13 regarding market incentive, that the stakeholders in Indonesia, especially the private sectors as well as the governments, think that it's not currently being implemented by the EU. So Article 13 in the VPA specifically is on market incentive. So this is what is written in the Article 13. So, and this is actually the obligation of the EU that, under the perception of Indonesian VPA stakeholders, they don't think that the EU really have been helpful in upholding this or undertaking this Article 13, whereby in Indonesia, even though it's still not perfect, we still have a lot of rooms for improvement, but maintaining the commitment has been there. The commitment is still there, and I think the push for strengthening it should also come from the other side, from the consumer in this regard is the EU. And when we're talking about the EU DDR proposal, firstly, it will affect 4 commodities in Indonesia. From the biggest one is palm oil, and also timber, cacao, and also coffee. And out of these 4 commodities, timber and palm oil have already got a national system to confirm with legality and sustainability standard. ISPO for palm oil and SVLK for timber. Although ISPO is still considered weak, also from us in civil society, it's not robust enough, still need to be improved and strengthened. And the SVLK, which is currently under revision process, being revised at the moment, SVLK has already got a sustainability standards, even though it currently only apply for forest management units, both the big scale or the forest concessions, and also small scale by the community for the forest estate. And smallholders, again, like I said, it play a big role in all commodities production. Therefore, it is very important to ensure that they will not get sidelined or excluded. And it's also equally important for them to get support and incentive for them to comply with the regulations. For palm oil, the area of smallholders is more than 40%, yeah, almost half is smallholders in Indonesia. For the timber, even though it's not as big, but the production of wood product by SMEs is quite significant, with the value of export of more than $1 billion US. For cacao and coffee, even though it's not that significant with regard to the export value to the EU, but there are almost 100% smallholders in Indonesia, and some of them have, supplying to the big companies that I believe some of them are also exporting to the EU. And now what about the partnership? Like Boyan said that the Article 27 and 28 of this proposal, if you look at the proposal, this cooperation, I think it's only related with country risk assessment because it's written there. Even though the themes of the cooperation, it covers all across the requirements mentioned in the proposal. But at the moment, there is no clear guidance being laid out how this partnership or this cooperation will be developed and implemented, and whether or not it will be a national process like the Flexi VPA, or like any cooperation projects under all these themes set out in the regulation proposal will be accepted, just like put them all together, like many have already said, there is no, at the moment, at least no clear indicator or system to measure forest degradation, especially for the timber, sustainability, a system for traceability, implement traceability, and also, again, I have to bring out this incentive, and these all are quite key to try if we want to have like the buy-in from the private sector as well as the government to even to start talking in the countries, and because of the experience, in the current agreement between Indonesia and the EU, the perception of the EU DDR by stakeholders in Indonesia is more on the skeptical side, and if we cannot change this perception, it will be harder to push for engagement and or the willingness to comply with this regulation. I think I don't know if Boyan was there in the last GIC meeting. The head of Indonesian delegation has made quite a strong statement with regard to this proposal. So there is a lot of work to be done, I think. And so what are the next steps? I do believe that the current Indonesia Flexi VPA should be maintained and strengthened, and that the EU should start dialogue. I believe that to some extent it has started, but I think in more extensive dialogue is needed, especially talking about what are the future of VPA in light of this new regulation, and whether there are possibility to amend the VPA, for example, to also include deforestation or degradation-free requirement. And this is very key, like I said, because in Indonesia, we are undergoing the revision process of the SBLK, which is the backbone of PPA. So if there is a vision of like Indonesia can sort of like, I don't know, modify or maybe together with the EU, like if this discussion can happen, I think it will be very beneficial for both the EU and Indonesia. And secondly, this is also important to undertake its commitment under the FLEGT VPA. This will demonstrate that the complying with the EU requirements, does have incentives, I think, and especially because this is under a partnership agreement, and that this will set like a precedent, because already at the, here in Indonesia, people are saying that what good will it be, because it's not moving the goalpost, but like Julia said, it takes two sides, yeah, if you want to make it work between the producer and consumer countries. Also, in country multi-stakeholder dialogues on this regulation should be held in order to raise awareness and also gain insight and inputs in such a topic as such benchmarking system, how the involvement of the producing countries in this system, enforcement, and a lot of other topics covered by this regulation. And also with regard to the partnership, I think a clear guidance or framework on how partnership or cooperation under this proposal or under this regulation will be developed and implemented will be key to move forward. And this framework, along with a roadmap and time frame, should be agreed with the potential partner country prior to implementation. And also it should have like a space or a flexibility to to consider like the local context or national context from each partner countries. So I think that's from me. And again, for me, for us, it is this proposal is a step in the right direction, but ensuring that producing countries can comply and also can and also willing to comply is quite key. And for this to happen, I think a close cooperation or a partnership that is based or built through a multi-stakeholder process will be key to ensure like ownership in the country, as well as the achieving the goal of this regulation currently being developed. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Minang. So Obed, could you please take the floor as well? Minang, could you stop sharing your screen?
Sorry, how do it? I cannot see my cursor. Sorry. How do I do this?
Don't worry. Yeah.
Okay.
All right. Okay, here we go.
Hello, can you hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you, Obed.
Excellent. Thank you, Maria and Jonathan, for inviting me to be part of this panel. I must say that Julia and Minang seem to have done a lot of justice to some of the issues that I intended to raise, but I will re-emphasize them anyway. I will quickly go through my slides, just a few slides and a few issues to tackle. Generally, deforestation might be a global problem, as we all know, but what we have come to realize through a lot of instruments that the EU and other partners have introduced is that the solution to the problems of deforestation are localized, and it will require localized efforts to realize those solutions. And the emphasis here is localized efforts. It's obvious that some of the past interventions have not yielded the required outcomes and will require a change of strategy. And we assume one of those strategies that is changing is the passage or the proposal that is on the table now, the EU Due Diligence Regulation on forest-based commodity. But I think it needs to be emphasized that majority of remaining forest estates are located in developing countries where two key issues continue to drive forest loss. And those two key issues are poverty and rule of law. So I really want us to take these four issues into context as we go on in the remaining slides, that solutions to dealing with deforestation require localized efforts, and that effort in the past have not really yielded the results, and we need to change the trajectory. And that poverty and rule of law are probably two of the greatest threats to forest conservation and management, especially in the global south, where most of these forests are located. Having said that, I want to look at some of the implications that this new EU due diligence regulation as a demand-side measure could potentially have on producer countries such as Ghana. What we have realized, going through the almost 80-page draft regulation, is that it will require changes in policy and regulation frameworks that govern cocoa and other commodity production in producer countries. That will mean that there need to be resources, efforts put into making sure that policies and programs that are already existing are realigned to the requirements in the draft proposal. Also, we have deduced, or we've seen from the proposal, that there is a potential of overhauling the how and where local farmers and smallholders undertake their farming activities. And we also want to put on record that these smallholders and individual farmers, especially involved in cocoa production in Ghana, that is their main source of livelihood, and it is independent of government. Producers in Ghana, Cote d'Ivoire, to some extent, produce on their own, especially some of the commodities that we are discussing under this new EU due diligence regulation. So that also needs to be understood, that the law might be in the EU, and producer countries will be required to meet the requirements, but ultimately it will not fall on the private sector. Sometimes there are a lot of misconceptions that this is targeted at the operator. The operator will shift that requirement to meet the due diligence requirement to meet what is needed to the farmer or smallholder who is on the field, who actually plants the tree. So that is also very, very worth noting. We have also found that one of the key implications that this particular EU due diligence regulation could have is a dramatic limit to access to the very lucrative EU market for smallholders. And in the case of cocoa, where I am currently very focused on, you realize that in Ghana, you cannot trade your cocoa to anybody except through the state institution. So unlike other commodities like tomato, mango that you can take to the market and sell, you have no other channel of trade except through the cocoa board, and most of almost 70% of the cocoa produced ends up in the EU. So when this EU due diligence regulation comes into force, there is a possibility that some farmer in my home village of Nkari might not have their cocoa being bought or meeting the requirements, and that they will lose out on access to market, which means poverty will be entrenched and people will go home hungry. And having said this, whilst we do agree, and for some of us, we have been on top of some of these issues, going to Europe, being in Brussels, meeting MEPs and discussing the need for such regulations, we also want to put on record that consuming countries are equally obligated as producer countries to also take steps in finding solutions for deforestation through their choices, and their consumption drives some of these. And it is worth knowing or noting that countries like France and others did publish their imported deforestation guidelines some time back and are taking steps towards this. But for us, CSOs in the global north and south who have been advocating for this EU regulation, we think it's a great first step, but there are some elements that needs to be fine-tuned to get the required outcome that we all envisage. And I think Julia did elaborate on some of those issues, so I wouldn't waste time going over them. But in principle, we believe that this EU due diligence regulation is a necessary evil. And I have a farm in Ghana. My grandmother is a farmer, and I know how difficult it will be to meet some of the requirements, especially the zero deforestation and even the legality definition indicators or elements that are detailed in the EU due diligence regulation. But we think it's a necessary first step that will require a lot of cooperation and partnership and consensus building between the EU and producer countries like Ghana and Cote d'Ivoire to really fine-tune it so that we both benefit. For us, the EU needs to understand that forest-raised commodity producing countries are a sovereign state, or we are sovereign states. And I was in Berlin when the CEO of Cocoa Board said that any attempts by the EU to impose a regulation on Ghana or Cote d'Ivoire will be met with resistance. And he's on record to have said that during the World Cocoa Foundation Partners meeting in Berlin, 2019. And so the EU needs to understand that and go through a process of consultation and engagements with producer countries to avoid producer countries seeing this EU due diligence regulation as an imposition. And that is very, very important. It will require transparent and mutually beneficial bilateral and multilateral cooperation and partnership discussions. And also, we need to put on record or have at the back of our mind that no country, not even a poor country like mine, wants to be bullied. So any attempts that will indicate that the EU is wanting to impose such a regulation, although we know it is a demand-side regulation, but it has a lot of implications on us as producers. Any attempt that will not factor into consideration a lot of consultation, consensus building with producer countries from where we sit and the engagement with some of the powers that be in producer countries, it might be met with a lot of resistance. And I'm happy to hear Bojan say that there has been an initiation of dialoguing and discussions with producer countries like Ghana and Cote d'Ivoire. I think that is the best approach to go. But even whilst we begin that process, we think there are lessons that we can learn from some of the existing processes that have happened. And it was interesting that Bojan started his presentation by re-emphasizing the fitness check that was done by the EU. We have had reservations about that fitness check that was done. We felt that the sample size and the sample people that were sampled to give responses did not really allow the assessment to bring the required outcome. But be as it may, we think there are great lessons to guide us as we move forward in an attempt to realize the Article 28 of the new the draft regulation, which is talking about partnerships. There is a great example in the FLEG VP where after the FLEG action plans were developed, there was a conscious effort on the part of the EU to engage producer countries to come up with the voluntary partnership agreements that detailed out how producer countries could also put their systems in place to meet the requirements of the EU due diligence regulation and even beyond. So on that note, we have brought up some of those needs that are in the FLEG VPA that could be useful as we move forward in realizing Article 28 of the draft EU due diligence regulation. And the first is the need to make the process clear from the onset. And I think Minan and others have said it. The text as contained in Article 28 is not very clear. It mentions forest partnerships, but we don't know the architecture of it. And on several platforms, I've heard Hugo Chalet and Chantal make references to forest partnerships, but we are still at a loss how that partnership will evolve, and the regulation was also very silent on it. So there need to be a detailed, clear process communicated to producer countries right from the onset. Also, there is the need to understand what the actual problems are. And I think on my first slide, I tried to point those problems: poverty and rule of law. And I know that in countries like Ghana and Cote d'Ivoire, the EU has begun this sustainable cocoa dialogues. And one of the focus is to identify the inherent challenges within the cocoa space. And I believe that will feed, or that should feed into any future forest partnership discussions that Ghana and EU, or EU and Cote d'Ivoire will be involved in. Again, there is the need to agree on what outcomes are expected and to set up the indicators to measure them. And I think that was clearly done in the FLEG VPA, where right from the onset, we understood what we needed to do, and we understood the indicators we needed to meet, and we designed our system, our legality definitions in all the 15 VPA countries. It was an internal discussion to arrive at some of those outcomes that we all want. And that is very, very, very important. One other thing that we have realized in this EU due diligence regulation that we feel lessons from the FLEG VPA will be very, very useful is the need for country-specific definitions and modalities. One definition fit or defining forest deforestation within a general context and requiring all cocoa and coffee and other producing countries to meet that definition, we are seeing that it will become a problem. We could learn from that cooperation and partnership agreement that was done in the FLEG VPA, where partner countries were given the opportunity to undertake in-country multi-stakeholder processes to define the elements of legality. Of course, not all of them were in law, so there was a need to develop new laws to meet those legality definitions that the people feel is the most required definition. And I think that is very, very important. Again, there's a need to work jointly with producer countries, that if there is a top-down approach, as said by Honorable Aidoo in Berlin, it could bring a lot of challenges. It could bring a lot of apathy on the part of producer countries to not want to meet the requirements and the issues that Julia and Minan spoke about, potential leakages to China, to other emerging markets could come up. So there needs to be a joint effort between the EU and producer countries to realize that that should be some of the details of a cooperation or partnership agreement. Again, there is a need to support in-country processes to feed into these international negotiations and dialogues. Cocoa is produced by farmers and farmer organizations. Their needs to feed into any higher level consensus that will be built. And this will require that there is in-country processes at the farmer level, at the community level, at the district level that feeds into the national process. Failure to do this will mean a top-down imposition of a law, of legality definition, or of zero deforestation indicators, which might not be met on the ground. So we need to pick what is existing on the ground and work it up to feed into the national and international conversations. Then finally, they need to motivate producer countries to stick to the plan that will be developed from this partnership agreements. And there have been several options that have been thrown out there. And I'm happy that last week in Berlin, there were conversations about pricing. Poverty is the #1 cause of forest loss, especially among cocoa producing regions, because farmers and farm families need to survive. And the way they survive is to feed on the land that their grandfathers left for them. So poverty is important, and the underlying cause of farmer poverty is unfair pricing at the international level. So whilst we discuss the legality and zero deforestation indicators, one of the key missing links that needs to come into the discussion is how do we ensure that farmers are receiving prompt and adequate compensation for their crops that they produce. So one of the things that could be used to motivate cocoa producing countries or forestry producing countries like Ghana, especially on the cocoa front, is to begin a dialogue on pricing. How do we ensure that farmers are well compensated for their efforts in producing the commodities that they produce? And lastly, we need to understand that real change takes time. And this is one of the things that has bedeviled the VPA process, that people at the EU level are so quick to see a FLEC license that they fail to identify and appreciate the changes in governance, the changes in the legal framework, the policy architecture of countries that have signed up to the FLEC VPA. At least for me, I can speak to Ghana and Liberia, that there have been tremendous governance reform within the forestry sector that unfortunately the fitness check did not take into consideration.
Yeah,
so
Obed, I'm sorry, I'm very sorry to interrupt you. I know that Bojan has to leave now, but I think he also would like to react to you and Minang. And therefore, if you don't mind, I would like to give Bojan a quick opportunity to react, and then we can continue. Okay. Perhaps, yeah, just...
Sure.
Bojan, could you go ahead? And in the meantime, Obed, could you stop sharing for a moment?
Yeah, thank you very much, and sorry for coming in like this, but maybe I misunderstood. I thought that the event was until 12.
It is indeed correct. We are running a bit over time, unfortunately.
Yes, I would really like to stay until the end. I think it would be extremely important for me to hear what let's say the interventions until the end. So I'm not particularly happy that this is going over the time, but I understand sometimes it's difficult. I do unfortunately have to leave for another meeting. Before leaving, I just wanted to once again thank to the organizers for the excellent event. I found it super fruitful and extremely useful in terms of understanding better some of the different views, and also listening to a number of extremely important elements that have been mentioned also from the different presentations. Before I leave, I just want to reiterate that I am a little bit surprised with the last two presentations, also in that sense that, as I said from the beginning, this is in no way a kind of EU unilateral measure. It's all very closely related with the partnerships and working together with the partner countries. So I'm very sorry if that message didn't get through. That means that I failed at my job. But the idea was definitely that to say that, as I said before, this is one piece of the puzzle, and it will not work alone. We need to see, we need to work. We are working already on all the other elements as identified in the 2019 communication on deforestation, among others. Close cooperation with producing and consumer countries. This is an absolutely central piece of work, and whatever we are doing in the regulation, it's very much related to that. I do wish to to invite everyone to understand that having an article like the one that we do have in the proposal, Article 28 on cooperation, is actually quite unique. Basically, in general, if you look at the EU regulations, but not only EU, if you look in other countries, these kind of articles are super, super rare. So this emphasizes even more that the cooperation is crucial. Now, I do feel that the last two presentations, and I'm sorry that I have to say this, focus less on deforestation and focus much more on FLEC VPAs. As I mentioned, we will ensure, not only need to ensure, but we will ensure that we learn and we build on all the excellent achievements, and some of them I mentioned myself before, from the FLEC experience. But we also need to learn from lessons learned on what didn't work. And there are quite a number of things that didn't work. I didn't go into details on that on fitness check, but I would be more than happy to provide more details. And I do understand that colleagues might have different views, but the facts are there. The percentage of relevant trade covered are there. This doesn't mean in no way that the stakeholder participation and governance reforms in VPA countries are not recognized. Not at all. I would like to emphasize that it's important to understand that nobody sees it like that. I would also like to mention in terms of Indonesia that EU is already in a dialogue with Indonesia. We have presented on the proposal, and we will continue doing that. That was agreed in the last GIG. But a little bit like your presentation on Indonesia, this is actually not about flagged VPAs. It is not. It is much broader. It is about many other commodities, and focusing only on legality and only on timber is simply not sufficient. So we need to find, together with the partner countries, the better ways to cooperate in the broader context. And in Indonesia, there are plenty of other commodities that are actually important. In terms of sustainability that you mentioned, just one short remark. All the work on sustainability related in all partner countries and also within the EU is more than welcome. But we need to be careful. It is not enough to simply change a label from legality to sustainability. This is not something that is we find as a good way forward, and we need to be very careful about it. And then about the EU-centric approach, once again emphasizing all the approach is about doing and working in partnership with the partner countries, both producer and consumers. And I do feel in this event that the working with consumers is actually, it was not emphasized enough. It was not even mentioned by many colleagues, and I'm very worried about it, because the leakage, and everybody seems to be mentioning leakage, can only be dealt with if the EU works closely together with the other consumer countries, just as we did in the illegal logging experience. I was a bit surprised to hear in this particular meeting on deforestation details about the flagged VPAs and calls from Indonesia on Article 13. The EU has, and I have to clarify on this one because it's a very specific thing, we have provided very clear and detailed updates on what the EU and member states are doing in terms of the obligations of Article 13 in the last JIC meeting in December. And that was very much appreciated by the Indonesian side. We do need to understand that Article 13 in no means means that the EU is in any way obliged to do a specific marketing for Indonesian products. That's not the case. That's a wrong interpretation, and it would actually not be acceptable under the WTO rules, and it would also not be seen particularly welcomed by other EU partners. Also, it was very good to hear about the good elements of the VPA, and we can only, as I said, build on that, and we will build on that. But we shouldn't forget that not everything is that beautiful. So I'm a little bit surprised, even in Indonesia. I'm a little bit surprised that you did not mention any problems about checks on imports, about particular infringements in several parts of the country, and also about how the changes are actually made. Where in VPA is very clear that any change to the system has to be informed and has to be agreed with the EU, which we know that in the past hasn't really been the case. And these are some of the issues related with the VPAs more in general. As you know, the new proposal is building on the fitness check and is building on the impact assessment. Several options were identified, and just to be very clear, including a kind of negotiation of country-specific definitions or deforestation-free in a VPA-like agreements was assessed, but this did not turn out to be one of the measures that we would foresee in the EU for many reasons. And among them, the lessons learned from FLEGT. And I do invite you to go through those in the published documents at the EU websites. And we are, of course, very much interested in providing further details if necessary. But I didn't really realize that, although I had some personal doubts, I didn't realize that this event would turn out to be so BPA centered as in this last part. This was not the idea on our side. And it's definitely not the idea how we see it more broadly. Why? Because we do need to have an open view and a broader view to be able to address the broader deforestation and current problems. We should not be stuck in the past experiences as the only way forward, but we do need to build on all the good elements already achieved. In this sense, let's not forget that the legal deforestation is an enormous problem, also in countries such as Indonesia. Some of the statistics show that almost 50% of deforestation is actually legal. So we have a problem there with the BPA approach. And in terms of country-specific definitions that also were mentioned as a way forward, of course, all the EU work with the countries, with partner countries, will always be country-specific, and all the work needs to be adapted, be it forest partnerships, cocoa talks, or any other tool that will be used. However, country-specific definitions are not something that the EU sees as the way forward in terms of leaving out the definition at the EU level. Why not? Working with partner countries, of course, on country-specific definitions, but in terms of having one definition at the EU level, that's a main element of the new system. And that is there exactly to avoid the patchwork of different national systems, and then having what actually in the flagged system would have been a problem if we had more than one country licensing, which is telling. Every country that would license, let's say if we had 2 or 3, would have different product scope, they would have different standards, and those would actually be different from the EU timber regulation. This is a huge problem and a huge complexity also in terms of raising costs for both industry and authorities. This is definitely not the way that we want to go. So while working very closely with the partner countries and respecting all the developments, and not only respecting, but working together on supporting developments in all relevant fields, a VPA approach is something that we need to learn from the good sides of it, but also to avoid making the same mistakes in the future. Otherwise, we could imagine that in 20 years we have, well, speaking about many other commodities that we cover besides timber, maybe 75, 100 VPAs, and out of those, what, 1 or 2 actually licensing? What would be the effect on deforestation in the meantime? And how much would that actually cost? With this, I do wish to thank once again to all the organizers, especially, and then also to the panelists. It was really great to hear from you, and also to all the questions and the participants. Before I leave, just once again to mention, please do bear in mind that the work on this proposal is just one piece of the puzzle, and it's equally important to work on the rest, especially working with producer and consumer countries. And one more thing, not all of this other work with producers, consumers, but also on finances or on developing science, or for example, the satellite observations, not all these elements need to be covered in the legislative proposal or in the legislative, in the regulation. Actually, that's not possible. So just to keep in mind that not everything has to be in the regulation, and that's simply not the way to do it. With this, thank you very much. And once again, very sorry that I have to leave, now running to another meeting. And with huge thanks, have a very, very good rest of the day. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Bojan, for the clear response. It was, of course, not the main framing of this panel to speak about VPAs, but the panelists, are free to bring up those issues that they feel most relevant on the topic of cooperation. So therefore, it was probably unavoidable that we ended up speaking about the VPAs. Now, I'm very sorry that I had to interrupt Obed, and I'm not sure you're still with us. Perfect. I suggest, we are running over time, but I would like to give Obed the opportunity to wrap up his presentation, as it was not intended to cut you off at the end. Obed, would you like to conclude your talk?
Yes, thank you very much, Maria. But I think I had almost finished my slides anyway. So that was the last but one slide. So the last slide would have looked at the way forward and expectations. But maybe I will take this time to respond to some of the points that Bojan made, because I think some of them are begging for responses. First of all, when he says that we are making this presentation or this dialogue about FLECT or VPAs, what is the most progressive deforestation action plan currently being implemented at the EU level? And that is the FLECT action plan. That is looking at illegal logging and VPAs. So VPAs are a very, very important learning tool or learning example. And I was happy that he made references to the lessons And what we are saying is, let's learn from the good lessons. And actually, on the second point I want to make is that it is very, very, very hypocritical on the part of Boyan to seem to put all the blame on producer countries. And I heard him making references to how almost 50% of deforestation in Indonesia is illegal. It's legal, but it's in the VPA definition and all that. And there was a mutual discussion and dialoguing, and the EU were at the table. So if you identify that illegal deforestation were added to the definitions, you had all the chances to raise them. And the same thing in Ghana. But the other point I want to make is that they also had a responsibility. In 2019, we went to the EU, about 5 EU member states, and realized that the EU member states were not even prepared to receive FLEC licenses. And this goes to the hypocrisy on the part of the EU, that they are putting all the blames on producer countries, but they are not taking any of the blames for the failure, so-called, as they see it, of the FLEC VPA process. And I think that is disappointing. If the same attitude is brought to the forest partnerships, then we have a very long way to go. Maria, I think I will end there.
All right, Obed, this was very clear. Thank you very much. Now, I would like at this point to close the panel. There are some questions in the Q&A, but they were addressed to Boyan, and unfortunately he's left already. So due to the time, I would like to close the session. I'm thanking very much to all the participants for this very rich, sometimes intense discussion. And I hope that we can continue this kind of discussions on other occasions in the future. There will be links sent, Zoom links sent to you for a quick debrief that Jonathan and we can meet now to debrief. And Julia and Minang, you're happy to join us if you wish. So have a very nice day. Thank you. Bye-bye.